I checked the parking lot from the steps of the city complex where I stood, once more to be sure his truck was still there. I knew he had arrived a few minutes ago and should be good for another 10 to 20 minutes before leaving, but I wanted to be sure. Her phone call to him had only mentioned wanting to talk about my trip. He was probably at the counter talking to her right this minute, making plans for tonight when I would supposedly be out of town for 2 days. 2 days for them to spend time together. Yes, he would stay and talk to her. I was just nervous, and if truth be told, also a little excited. I wanted this to go as planned. It was important for it to be just right since I had been planning this for almost 2 weeks. I looked again for John's car and was rewarded with the sight of his Camaro pulling into the parking lot, the smoke from the exhaust signaling its presence. It was a piece of junk to me but a beloved classic to him, and now it carried important news. John parked, awkwardly getting out of the car and grabbing a worn briefcase. He slammed the door twice to get it to stay shut and walked toward me. The blinding white teeth in his red face showed him smiling, and it was all I needed to see to return his smile. He raised the briefcase triumphantly as he climbed the steps to where I was standing. He reached me, pulled out a sheath of papers, and handed them to me, laughing, "It's all here, just what you wanted. Junior is right behind me with his copies." The cops are right behind him, and they agreed to follow his lead. Just a few minutes, and you get what you wanted. I took the papers he gave me, checked to be sure they were what I expected, and then smiled back at him. Perfect. Junior has the official copies for both of them. He's got them both just as you wanted. Relax, Bob, it'll be over very quickly. As I nodded, he took a last chance to ask me, "Are you sure, Bob? Are you damn sure this is what you want? There's still time to change your mind." "Yes, I'm sure. I'm very damn sure. Our life till now, Maxine Gray and I were married 16 years ago this month. We met and fell in love in high school and then dated off and on through college. I went to Ohio State, and she went to Mount Union near Youngstown. We both dated others during college but always reconnected during the holidays. We both graduated in 1989 and moved back to our hometown of Toledo. Maxine had a degree in accounting and got a job working for the city in the auditor's office. I was an engineer and went to work for my dad in his construction business. My degree was in civil engineering, so I began to slowly take over his job with the idea of him retiring and me eventually running the whole thing. That was fine with me since I had always wanted to do what he did, run my own company and build things. My name is Bob Underhill, and my dad's business is Underhill Construction. He concentrates mainly on industrial construction and rarely bothers with small jobs, bidding only on those that will keep him working for years. Those were the big ones, and there were plenty of them around. When I graduated, he started me working on the bids, the part of the job that made us successful. A good bid was necessary to making a profit and getting a foot in the door. Too high meant no chance in hell, too low meant a good chance to work but a sure loss of profit. A good bid would open the door for the job and for a lot more down the road. I learned from a pro. Maxine and I were dating, and as we both settled into our jobs, talk of marriage was inevitable. We danced around it for several months, but I finally asked her to marry me one sunny day in May. She accepted, and we planned for a September wedding. Our life as a couple began in 1991 when we pledged our love and devotion to each other for the rest of our lives. We took a week-long honeymoon in Hawaii, where we learned that intimacy was something we both enjoyed. I was surprised to find she was quite enthusiastic and eager to explore different aspects of our relationship. I was happy to go along with her exploration, and we enjoyed a fulfilling and varied experience. When we returned and started our life as a married couple, we continued to nurture our connection, finding comfort in our shared experiences. We were in love, and our lives were almost perfect. We planned on starting a family later, once we felt secure in our lives, but in the meantime, we enjoyed our time together. 5 years into our marriage, during an intimate moment, I asked Maxine, "Do you want kids? If so, how many?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with affection, and nodded in agreement. She loved the position we were in, as it gave her a sense of control, and I thoroughly enjoyed seeing her in such a state of pleasure and contentment. Her flushed face and passionate gaze made the moment all the more special. When she finally moved beside me, she said, "God, that was wonderful. I love you, Bobby. I truly love you." She kissed me tenderly, her hands sliding down my body. Her eyes conveyed her sincerity, and she continued, "Yes, I want kids. I think we should start as soon as possible. Your job is secure with your dad, and I have many assignments I could take. I could work until I get pregnant, take time off to have our baby, and then return to work when the baby is old enough for daycare." "That's exactly what I was thinking," I told her. "Well, it's too late tonight since I'm still on the pill, but I can stop in 2 weeks. Until then, we need to keep practicing." She laughed and said she was so tired she just wanted to sleep in my arms. Maxine stopped taking her pills as planned, and we began our journey towards starting a family. After almost 5 months, we were thrilled to discover she was pregnant. We named our first child Tiffany, and choosing Tiffany after Max's mom and after mine. Maxine took excellent care of herself and the baby, and when Tiffany was born, she was perfect. Maxine proved to be a wonderful mother, caring for both our children and me. Life was truly wonderful. As Tiffany grew, we decided to look into daycare when she turned 3. Max found a great place, which we both vetted and approved. Tiffany started soon after, and Maxine went back to work. When Tiffany turned 4, we decided to try for a second child. Our intimate life had returned to where it was before Maxine's pregnancy, and while I hesitated to give that up, we agreed it was time. We practiced regularly until Maxine announced she was expecting our second child. I was excited and wanted to enjoy as much time together before she started to feel uncomfortable. We made love often, discovering new things that added to our shared experiences. When we learned that our second child would be a boy, we were both delighted. We wanted one of each and planned to continue until we had both boys and girls. When our son, Leif Thomas, was born healthy and happy, we felt complete. We named him after my father and hers. Life was perfect as Leif grew, and Max stayed home to care for both children. When Leif turned 2.5, Max was ready to return to work. I supported her decision, and she began preparing to go back. Around that time, our perfect life became slightly less perfect with the arrival of new neighbors, Tom and Christine DeMint. Christine and Max quickly became good friends, though Tom and I never developed a close friendship. Christine and Max became very close, and Christine often visited our home. I had no specific reason, but I felt a sense of distrust towards Christine. Despite this, Maxine returned to work at the city complex in the building permit department, which allowed me to see her fairly often when I went in for permits or other requirements. Life settled back into a comfortable routine, and our love life was fulfilling. We celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary, and things seemed great. Unbeknownst to me, trouble began when Christine encouraged Max and me to host a party to introduce our friends to her and Tom. I agreed to invite some of my construction friends, and Christine had a list of people she and Tom knew. We planned a Saturday afternoon barbecue and sent the kids to Grandma and Grandpa's for the day. The party was a success, and I introduced Christine and Tom to many of my friends. I took the time to include Max since she had not met many of the guests. Things were going well until I noticed Sam Fontaine, a trucking contractor I worked with occasionally. I hadn't invited him, so I wondered how he got here. I wasn't particularly fond of Sam. His reputation for skirting the law was well known, and he had a reputation for being a ladies' man, often pursuing women regardless of their relationship status. I saw him talking with some of the ladies and figured he was likely taking names while he was here. Later, Max came over and pulled me aside, asking, "Who's that good-looking man in the leather jacket and tight jeans?" "He's attractive." I replied, "That's Sam Fontaine. Stay away from him. He's known for pursuing women whether they're married or single. He's quite a piece of work." "Why did you invite him if you don't like him?" she asked. Max didn't seem to fully believe me, which wasn't surprising since she didn't know him. I started to head back to the grill, but Max insisted, "Introduce me and Christine. I want to meet him and see what's so interesting about him." She pulled me toward Christine, and once they were together, she led us to Sam. I had little choice but to follow. "Hey there, Bob. Heard you were throwing a party." "Connie invited me, hope you don't mind," Sam said, speaking to me but clearly eyeing Christine and Maxine. His smile was wide, and I felt a surge of irritation, though I had no reason to confront him. "Sure, Sam, no problem. I want you to meet Maxine, my wife, and her friend Christine from next door." "Ladies, this is Sam Fontaine," I said, making the introductions. I moved away and returned to the grill, watching them from the corner of my eye as I continued to cook burgers and hot dogs while Tom managed the drinks. The party was going well, and I eventually forgot about Sam and the ladies as I became engrossed in conversation. Almost an hour later, Max returned to help with the food. I noticed she kept glancing towards Sam but thought little of it. As the afternoon progressed and guests began leaving, I noticed Maxine talking with Sam off to one side. They appeared to be engaged in a serious conversation, standing close together. I didn't like that and called over to Maxine to come help me. Max looked at me, stepped back from Sam, said something more, and then walked towards me. Distracted by another departing couple, I looked back and saw that Sam had left and Maxine was talking to Christine. The rest of the party went smoothly, and after everyone had gone home, Tom and Christine helped with the cleanup. Maxine was quiet the rest of the evening, focusing on cleaning up leftovers, washing dishes, and filling trash bags with paper plates and cups. I sat down in my chair to relax, my feet sore from standing at the grill all day. I likely fell asleep almost immediately since I don't remember much until Maxine woke me later to go to bed. I followed her, feeling tired but content, and went to bed thinking Max would be as exhausted as I was and would want nothing more than to sleep for hours. However, I was mistaken. As soon as the lights went out, Max was very assertive, initiating intimacy without delay. She seemed eager, and things quickly escalated. I was caught off guard by her sudden intensity and couldn't quite understand where this level of desire was coming from. Max's reaction was unusual, and while she often responded passionately to our moments together, she seemed already aroused before we even got to bed, which puzzled me. Afterward, as I lay there, I asked, "Max, what was that all about? Where did that come from?" She looked at me, her face flushing with embarrassment. She then slid away, turned her back to me, and sat on the edge of the bed. I was surprised to see that she was crying. I reached out to comfort her, but she stood up and moved away, heading to the bathroom and closing the door behind her. I felt confused and concerned, unsure of how to approach the situation. I decided it was best not to intrude and simply rolled over to try to get some rest. The next morning, I woke to the sounds of Leah and Tiff playing. I looked at the clock and saw it was nearly 10 a.m., and I had slept straight through. I got up, took a shower, and tried to shake off my fatigue. Half an hour later, I went downstairs to find Maxine and Christine sitting quietly at the kitchen table. As I walked in, Maxine stood up to get me a cup of coffee. I sat down, with Christine watching me in silence. Ordinarily, I might have welcomed that, but this morning it felt a bit foreboding. Max placed the cup of coffee in front of me and glanced at Chris, who then stood up and left. Once Chris was gone, Max spoke. "I'm sorry about last night. You must have thought I was out of my mind." "It was a big mistake," she said, moving around the table to sit across from me. "What do you mean, mistake?" "I'm a bit lost here," I replied, needing some clarity but hoping the coffee would help. Max explained, "Chris, some of the girls, and I were just having fun, joking around about our husbands and other topics. I got a bit carried away and was impulsive when we went to bed. I didn't think about you and I'm really sorry." She seemed genuinely embarrassed and had retreated to the bathroom to calm down when she felt overwhelmed. When she came out, I was already asleep, and she had decided to let it go. I thought about it and decided it was best to move on since Max clearly wanted to forget it. That's all right, Max. I was so tired. I don't think I would have enjoyed it anyway, I said, trying to ease the situation. Good. I'll make it up to you tonight. You can count on that, she replied, appearing relieved that whatever issue there was seemed to be resolved. Things seemed to settle, but a week later, Max asked if I minded her going out with Chris for drinks and conversation. They planned to invite a few other women Chris had met to establish some new contacts. She said they would be out for a couple of hours and asked if I could watch the kids, which I agreed to. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but that evening marked the beginning of changes in our routine. Sure, honey, it might be good for you to make new friends, I said, thinking it might be beneficial for her. I'll keep the kids entertained while you're out having fun. Maxine smiled, though her enthusiasm seemed a bit muted, perhaps reflecting her uncertainty about my reaction. On Thursday night, Max dressed conservatively in slacks, a blouse, and a sweater jacket. We were talking in the kitchen when Chris knocked on the door. Maxine said goodnight to me and the kids before heading out. What started as an occasional night out with Chris and their friends became a routine, happening once or twice a month initially, and then increasing to once a week. I took care of the kids, discovering enjoyable activities like indoor play areas, the zoo, and Chuck E. Cheese. I grew closer to my children during these times, which I appreciated. However, I noticed a change in our relationship. Initially, Max would return home and be eager to reconnect, but over time, the frequency of our intimate moments declined. Max also seemed more reserved and less interested in trying new things in bed. When I tried to address this with her, she became defensive and upset. I began to suspect something was amiss. To find out more, I started listening in on phone conversations between Max and Chris, but she quickly realized and adjusted her behavior, making it difficult to gather any useful information. Determined to understand what was happening, I went to Radio Shack for advice on how to discreetly monitor phone conversations. After explaining a fabricated story about concerns with my daughter's phone usage, the store employee recommended some equipment. I bought it and set up the system at home while Max was at work. I found the phone wire leading into the house from the garage and felt a moment of panic as I had to cut it and reconnect it to the small panel on the back of the recorder. The wires were tiny and tricky, but I managed to connect the device as instructed by the young man at Radio Shack. I placed the recorder behind a shelf with old magazines that hadn't been moved in years. The device was set to record all conversations onto a digital memory stick, which was said to hold up to 5 hours of audio. The recorder was programmed to activate based on sound, and I could play back the recordings on any computer with a USB connection. I completed the setup and returned to work. Despite checking the stick several times, the recordings only captured routine conversations with Chris. I suspected Max was being very cautious. To ensure she felt free to talk openly, I made a point of being visibly absent that evening. After dinner, I told Max I was taking the kids to the indoor gym so they could burn off some energy. She declined, citing housework, so I took them out, enjoying the time with them. We stayed away for about 2.5 hours, returning with the kids exhausted and ready for bed. When I came back downstairs, Maxine was watching TV in the den. I decided to check the recordings after she went to bed. Maxine had been going to bed earlier than usual, hoping I would be asleep by the time she turned in, which seemed to be an attempt to avoid intimacy. I went to the room where we kept the computer, started working on some emails, and waited for Maxine to retire. When she came by to say goodnight, I barely acknowledged her, focusing on my work. After she went upstairs, I went into the garage, retrieved the recorder, and shut it off. I pulled the memory stick and took it to the computer. I inserted the stick into a USB slot and accessed the files. I was surprised to find that the recordings contained a conversation between Maxine and Christine. The conversation was about how Maxine was spending time with Christine and some other women. They discussed their experiences and feelings, which included some details about their nights out and interactions with others. From what I heard, It was clear that Maxine and Christine had been involved in activities that seemed to upset Maxine. There was talk about wanting to add more nights out and comments about past experiences that were quite revealing. Maxine's hesitations and nervousness indicated she was conflicted about the situation. After copying the file to my hard drive and erasing the stick for future use, I prepared to return it and replace the box. As I went to bed, I replayed the conversation in my mind, feeling a growing sense of unease and frustration. I had an inkling of what was happening, but without concrete proof, I knew I needed more evidence to understand the full extent of the situation. Maxine was already in bed, pretending to be asleep, but I could sense her tension. Her breathing quickened when I turned towards her, but I just settled down and closed my eyes. She seemed to gradually relax as I made no further moves towards her. I eventually fell asleep, my mind overloaded with thoughts. The next day, I went through the yellow pages and found an ad for a private investigator. I called and made an appointment for later that afternoon. I finished some outstanding work and completed a bid that was due, but decided to postpone discussing it with my colleagues until the following morning. I drove to a part of town that had seen better days and found the building housing the address I needed. The building was in poor condition, but I focused on my objective rather than its appearance. I entered the office on the second floor, finding an empty desk where a secretary should have been. Instead, there was a small sign directing me to a door further back. I walked over and knocked. "Come on in, it's open," came a voice from inside. The room contained a large man, probably over 300 pounds, who filled the small space. Despite his imposing appearance, his smile was warm and reassuring. I introduced myself and extended my hand, which he shook firmly. I felt a sense of trust in him despite his less than polished demeanor. "You must be Mr. Pattern. My name's John Spaulding, and I run this place. Have a seat. As you can see, I need to sit a lot," he said with a chuckle. "Please, call me Bob. Thanks for coming by so soon. What can I do for you?" I outlined my concerns and fears, explaining that I needed proof regarding my wife's activities. I provided background information, including the names and addresses of Christine and Tom, and mentioned Sam Fontaine as someone I suspected might be involved. Bob listened attentively, observing me closely. His demeanor made me both nervous and hopeful. "So, can you help me find out what I need to know?" I asked. "It seems straightforward, but I have a question," Bob replied. "What about this Fontaine guy? Do you want me to catch him with your wife?" "Yes, Sam Fontaine has a reputation for questionable behavior. I want as much information on him as possible," I said. "Believe it or not, I can handle nearly anything you need. It'll cost you, though. Do you prefer to pay by the day or for a complete job? The latter is cheaper in the long run. I can handle your wife, Mr. Fontaine, and the other individuals for a flat $5,000. Otherwise, I charge $300 a day plus expenses. Your choice." I was surprised by the amount but quickly decided that my situation was worth the expense. I opted for the full payment and informed him of my decision. He didn't seem to mind either way but requested a retainer. I wrote him a check for $2,500, which he glanced at before putting it away. "Here's how it works. You give me all the details you have, and I'll take it from there. I'll need to visit your home to install some equipment. You'll need to find a reason for me to access your bedrooms and garage. Can you manage that?" "That should be no problem. I've been considering installing an alarm system, so you could use that as a reason. How does that sound?" "Perfect. Let's get started with the information you have," Bob said. I left the office feeling more confident about taking steps to uncover the truth. As I drove home, I reflected on Bob's final words. He had asked me if I was sure about proceeding, warning that knowing the truth might end my marriage. He advised me to talk to my wife and try to resolve things before committing to his investigation. I reassured him that I wanted to move forward and get the answers I needed. Back at home, I arrived earlier than usual and entered through the back door instead of my usual side entrance. I saw Christine sitting in our kitchen talking to Max. Neither of them noticed me as I entered, so I quietly walked into the hallway leading to the kitchen, keeping as silent as possible. After my visit to Mr. Spaulding's office, I was determined to listen in on their conversation. I leaned back against the doorway and listened intently. I overheard more than I expected. "Come on, Max, you know he doesn't suspect anything. He thinks we just go out for drinks with the girls," Christine said. "Tom doesn't know anything either, but he doesn't care, so don't worry about it." "I can't help it," Max replied. "I just feel like he knows something's different. It's partly my fault. I've been less affectionate lately, and our intimacy has changed. I still enjoy being close to him, but he seems different now, and it worries me." "It's all in your head, Max. Bob trusts you." "You know that," Christine reassured her. "Yes, so I betray his trust," Max responded. "Oh, Chris, I have to end this. I love Bob so much, and I don't know what I'd do if he found out. But if you do, you'll never be happy again. He'll never accept what you're doing with Sam and Joe, and you'll miss it. I can tell." Christine laughed softly. "What if you invited me over to have a little fun with you and Bob? A real threesome to make things even?" "God, no. It would kill me to see him with you or anyone else. I'm such a hypocrite. I'm going to end it. I have to." "Sam won't let you," Christine warned. "He'll use those pictures he took the first time to show Bob. You're better off going along with it for a while until Sam gets bored." "Yes, I guess. It's not like it's a hardship," Max said, her voice tinged with resignation. "I don't know what he does to me, but I can't walk away. I just can't." They both laughed, and I felt sick to my stomach. I quietly returned to the back door, went outside, and then came in through the side door, making my usual noise. Chris patted me on the shoulder as she left, and I watched her go with a sense of frustration before turning back to Max. "Where are the kids?" "I didn't hear them when I came in." "No, they're with your mother. She wanted to take them out and buy them some new jeans. She's always buying them things." "I wish she wouldn't spoil them so much," Max said, her back to me as she pretended to be washing dishes. I didn't want to continue the conversation, so I just said, "Mom has too much time on her hands since Dad died. You know that." I walked away to change, feeling a surge of anger. In the bathroom, I shut the door, locked it, and sat down. I turned on the water in the sink and let the tears flow. The day had been overwhelming, talking with John, listening to the conversation with Chris, and seeing Max avoiding facing me. The grief was too much to bear, and I cried for about 15 minutes, like I hadn't since I was a child. I was gasping for breath by the time I stopped, my face wet and sticky. I washed my face and tried to compose myself. When I finally came back downstairs, my mom and the kids were there, showing me what they had bought. Tiffany had a new skirt she loved, and Leaf had new tennis shoes that were signed by someone, making them cost twice as much. I made appreciative noises for the kids, pulled Mom aside to thank her for the gifts and chided her for spending too much. She invited us over for a weekend barbecue, and I promised to check with Max and call her. I avoided Max for the rest of the evening and spent time playing with Leaf and Tiffany. They were playing with their toys and were happy to have me join in. I played with them until time for bed. They made the usual noises, but Max would not allow that, so they went off to bed. I sat down in my chair and turned on the TV. I just stared at it, not even knowing what I was watching, until much later when Max came in, snorted as she saw what was on, and changed the channel. She settled down and began watching some show or other while I watched her from the corner of my eye. I tried to see the changes in her that must have been there. I failed to see them. She looked like the same Maxine I had been married to for 15+ years, but she no longer acted like her. She was different, more moody, less talkative, her eyes rarely meeting mine for any time, her manner more abrupt. She was much less active in bed and rarely initiated sex now, where before she was always in the mood and usually took the initiative more than I did, and I enjoyed that. I got tired of always having to be the aggressor. None of that showed when I looked at her from the corner of my eye, and since she no longer trusted herself to look me in the eye, I was unable to see it then. By 11, I was tired and I needed sleep. Actually, I wanted the forgetfulness that sleep would bring. I told her I was tired and left to go up to bed. I took a shower to wash the stink of cheating off and crawled into bed, sad and depressed. I closed my eyes and sent a prayer to God to make all of this nothing but a bad dream. I prayed with all I had but felt nothing different. I felt the tears again, but this time I fought them, no more. I was almost asleep when I felt Max climbing beside me. I controlled my breathing to make her think I was asleep and tried not to tense up as she moved against me and put one arm over my hips. I felt her breathe on my shoulder but stopped any response. She whispered my name, but again I let my breathing continue unchanged. She tried to wake me by moving her body. I began counting to 1,000 by twos and was able to control any response. She finally gave up, rolled over onto her back, and became quiet. I was almost asleep when I heard the soft crying. At one time, that would have brought me out of a sound sleep to rush to her aid. Tonight, it simply made me go cold. The following morning, I mentioned to Max that I had a guy coming to give us an estimate on installing a security system we had talked about for some time, so Max was okay with that. I called John and told him to come ahead, and he said he would be there right after lunch. I told Max I would drive home to let him in so she could stay at work. Now all John had to do was install whatever equipment he needed. I just wanted it done. This was killing me, and so far, I had nothing but suspicions based on conversations between Max and Christine. The next few nights were similar to that night. I resisted Max's advances, telling her I was too tired and too involved in a big new job at work. Since Dad died, I was running the whole company but had trained men to handle the important tasks, leaving me with a lot of time now. I preferred to work rather than spend time with Max, though I didn't share that with her. I either went to bed early to pretend to be asleep when she came up or waited until she fell asleep and then either slid into bed or stayed downstairs on the couch. My life felt like a living hell, but I had to know the truth. John called on a Friday to inform me that so far nothing had shown up on his equipment. He asked if I could schedule a trip out of town for at least 3 days and nights. I agreed, so he instructed me to set it up. I did as requested and came home the following Monday night. After the kids were asleep, I told Max about the trip. "Max, I need to tell you something. I've got to go out of town for a few days to meet with some clients about a potential job. It's big and could keep the place working for almost a year. I'll fly out tomorrow evening and be back on Friday. I'll just be gone 3 nights. Max looked angry at my words, her expression suggesting she was trying to decide how to respond. For the first time in a while, she looked directly at me. I could sense her anger was justified, which almost made me laugh, but I resisted. "Well, it's nice of you to give me a day's notice. What am I supposed to do with Tiff and Leaf? Did you think of that?" Max asked. "Well, I've been taking care of them on Thursdays when you and your friends go out and stay out until after they go to bed. I work all day, then take care of them at night, but I don't see you doing the same for me. When have I ever asked you to watch them so I could have a night out?" I saw the pained look on her face as she realized the position she had put herself in with her complaint. The flush of blood to her face was visible before she turned away. "Let her handle that. You're right, I guess I have been unfair to you. I'm sorry. I'll be fine when you go, it's important, I know, or you wouldn't do it. I'll get your mom to help out. She'll love that." "Good, I'm glad you're okay with it. I have to pack tonight, so I'll leave directly from work." I was afraid my sarcasm might start an argument I didn't want to have, but Max didn't seem to notice. That night was the hardest so far. Maxine wanted to be intimate before I left, but I had to plead fatigue and worry. I told her to give me this week to make the decision on the job, and then I would be able to stop worrying and be my normal self. She took it hard, and again I heard her crying after she thought I was asleep. Her tears didn't make any impression on me now. I decided that if I came back and John told me things were okay and Max had done nothing while I was gone, I would end this whole thing and try to get my wife back. If John found nothing, that was a big if in my mind. I left the following day as planned. Actually, I checked into a hotel 50 miles away and stayed there for the next 3 days. I called Max on my cell phone several times a day while I was gone, particularly on Thursday when she would be out doing whatever she and Chris had been doing. But her cell was strangely quiet. All I got was a voicemail message saying she was not available and to leave a message for her to return. I left a message telling her that she must be doing something very important not to take my call. Maybe I had gone too far, but somehow the anger felt overwhelming. John told me not to call him, he would call me. So I waited and worked on some estimates that were actually fairly significant. The time dragged by. When John finally did call, it was the day before I was to fly home. He wanted me to come into the office as soon as I could. I checked out of my hotel and drove the 50 miles back to see John. I wish now that I hadn't. What he had for me was worse than I could imagine, but now the truth was mine. I knew what she was doing, who she was doing it with, and I was shocked. As I sat in John's office, he showed me pictures of Maxine with Sam Fontaine and another man I didn't know. There were pictures of her with each of them, and in several of the photos, Christine was also present. I saw things I had only dreamed of, things I had never done with Maxine. It made me sick with anger, sick with rage. John said nothing as I ran toward the bathroom to get sick. He sat behind his desk as he listened to me retching into the sink. He stood when he saw me stagger back into the room, my face pale with the remnants of the shock. He sat down as I slumped into the chair. He said nothing as I gathered my courage to ask, where were my children? I know these were taken in my bedroom. Where were they? I feared the answer but hoped that she wasn't that cruel. With your mother. They weren't there, John said. Rest easy on that. They weren't there. When did this happen? I asked. Thursday night. Did she do it on the other nights as well? No, this was the only time she had them at your house. That was the second night you were gone. I heard one of them say they'd never been allowed there before. He was so pleased to be involved. I have that on tape. That's from Sam Fontaine. He's a real piece of work. I want him dealt with. What can we do to take him down? I know adultery isn't a crime, so what can I do to deal with him? I was furious and wanted to take action, but I didn't want to risk being caught up in it. I know some guys. Leave it to me. It'll cost you an extra $2,000. Is that okay? Not a problem. I'll pay whatever it takes. Just get it done. Please. Give me a week. Talk to your lawyer if you need to and have him ready to serve in 1 week. I'll handle the rest. Get me the cash and small bills so I can buy what I need. Bob, you've got to trust me. Can you do that? I trust you, John, more than I trust the woman I loved, the mother of my children. I stayed with John that evening, and the two of us finished off a bottle of Johnny Walker whiskey. I woke the next day on the floor of a one-room apartment, which I gathered was John's. He was snoring away in a pull-down Murphy bed. I got up, washed as best I could, and woke him long enough for him to tell me my car was downstairs. I drove to work, spent a few hours there, and then drove home. I was rumpled enough to convince Max that I had spent a few hours on a plane after an early meeting with the clients. John convinced me that I needed to spend the next week with my wife, treating her as if nothing had changed. She couldn't know I was onto her, as she might inform Sam, which would wreck his plans. It was hard, but I decided to use the time to remember what it was like before. The problem was that I still loved her, even though she had cheated. That love would die slowly over time, but for now, it was still alive and punishing me for discovering the truth. It hurt, God, how it hurt. The first night home was the hardest. I played with my kids, helped put them to bed, and then spent the evening with Max, discussing the job. We went to bed together, and I was intimate with her for the first time in 3 weeks. I still loved her and had been faithful throughout our marriage, so I had no guilt to hold me back. I made love to her with every touch and every kiss. She responded fully, her body giving into the intimacy. I worried about STDs and even AIDS, but somehow, at that moment, I didn't care. What was I doing now? It felt like the death of my marriage and the perfect life I thought we shared. As the week progressed, I thought more and more about my life without Max. What about Tiffany and Leaf? What would they think when we separated? How would we arrange visitation? Who should have them? When she brought 2 men and another woman into our home, that made the decision easy. I was going for full custody and would use the pictures John had for leverage. I began to accept the end of my marriage, but what it brought with it was sadness. I found myself crying for no reason during the day and often at night. I was listless at work, got angry over trivial matters, and dreaded going home each evening. I had begun to spend more time at work, arriving home well after dinner. Max noticed my absence, but between my renewed energy in the bedroom and my strange behavior at other times, she was confused. I had been working with my lawyer to finalize the terms of the divorce. I wanted to ensure that the kids would not suffer. I planned for college funds, medical coverage, support, and all the necessities for raising children. Initially, I had hoped we would work together for their benefit, but now I had to plan for joint decision-making and how to manage our joint bank accounts and savings. We weren't wealthy, so those accounts were modest. We each had our own 401k plans, and while mine was funded as was my Social Security, I would not accept any claims from her on my investments. Her betrayal meant she forfeited any claims to my future. I made considerably more than Max, and while I accepted that I would need to provide some alimony, I aimed to make it as minimal as possible. I didn't want to pay her for her infidelity. She should work to earn money for her own expenses. I considered suggesting that she and Christine could start an escort service together, as they could potentially make a lot of money that way. Another issue was whether to inform Tom about Christine. I felt he deserved to know the truth about his wife. I discussed this with John, who suggested sending an anonymous envelope to Tom's workplace. I liked this idea and asked John to arrange it. He had all the details and told me to wait until the following Monday for the plan to unfold. That week, Maxine and I were intimate 3 times. Interestingly, she did not go out on her girls' night with Christine that week. I called John to check, and he told me that Max met Sam twice during the week at lunchtime. They had gone to a motel on Tuesday, but there had been no further incidents. I recalled that on Tuesday night, we had not been intimate because Max had claimed to have a headache. When we did make love on Thursday, I thought nothing more of it. I knew that regardless of her actions, Max would not remain faithful. She had built a life of deception, and I decided to let her continue with that life without me being a part of it. On Sunday evening, while we were in bed, I told Max that I had to go to Chicago the next day. It would be a short trip, leaving Monday afternoon and returning Tuesday evening. Max made a small fuss but accepted it, and then we made love for what I knew would be the last time. I gave it my all, knowing this was the end of our time together. She experienced several moments of intense pleasure, and I was committed to making it as meaningful as possible, despite everything. On Monday, I waited outside the city complex where Max worked with John, Jr., and the police. The children were already with my mother. I had spent an hour with her explaining what I planned to do and showed her one picture to convince her. Max's parents were too far away and dealing with their own health issues, so they wouldn't know anything unless she told them. At that moment, Tom's envelope was being delivered, and Christine was at home as usual. John indicated the arrival of Junior and Sheriff Turner. It was time to act. Junior walked up, spoke briefly to John, and then went into the complex carrying 2 envelopes, knowing where to go. I followed discreetly while the sheriff waited outside, his role to come later. Junior walked down the hall and turned into a small office area where a sign read building permits. A man, Sam Fontaine, was leaning against the counter talking to one of the women there. Junior approached her, confirmed her identity as Maxine, and handed her one of the envelopes. She looked puzzled but took it. Junior then looked at Sam Fontaine and asked if that was his name. Sam nodded, slightly confused. He pushed the remaining envelope towards Sam and said, "You have been served." Then he turned and walked quickly away, nodding at me as he passed. I observed Maxine's reaction from my concealed position. She opened the envelope, pulled out the documents, and read the first page. When she looked at the picture attached with a paper clip, her face went pale. Her hands began to tremble, and her mouth opened in a silent cry. She collapsed forward onto the counter, the envelope and its contents falling to the floor. I watched as tears streamed down her face, and she continued to try to scream. Eventually, she found her voice and let out an ear-splitting no that shattered the quiet of the area. She then slowly sank down behind the counter. Sam Fontaine had also looked at his document, which named him in a lawsuit and included a picture. It claimed a stake in his business and had a restraining order barring him from contact with Maxine, my home, or my place of business. Maxine found a similar restraining order in her documents, barring her from our home and the children until a visitation schedule could be arranged. Sam's face darkened with anger as he shoved the documents back into the envelope and stormed out of the building. I stayed hidden until he passed and then followed him at a distance as he exited through the front doors right into the path of the sheriff. I moved quickly to the open door and heard the sheriff say, "Sam Fontaine, you are under arrest for grand theft. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to remain silent and to have an attorney. If you can't afford one, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights?" Sam struggled but finally acknowledged that he understood. The sheriff and his deputy escorted Sam to their patrol car, and he bumped his head on the door frame as he was pushed inside. I heard a deputy mutter an apology. John later explained that there had been a series of thefts from local shops, and all the stolen merchandise had been found in one of Sam Fontaine's trucks. The items would be returned to their rightful places. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and one of John's contacts had informed the sheriff of Sam's location. I walked back inside and down the hall to Maxine's section. I stopped at the counter and looked around for her but didn't see her immediately. Eventually, I saw several women gathered around a chair where I assumed Maxine was sitting. I pushed through the group to see Max sitting with her head down and her shoulders slumped in defeat. It was a bittersweet sight, one I wished no one had to see. In a cold voice, suppressing any emotion I felt, I said, "Don't come home tonight. There is a restraining order included with your copies that forbids you from coming anywhere near me, the children, or the house until the court changes the conditions. Let me know where to send your belongings." Max looked up at me, her face pale, eyes bloodshot, and her mouth partly open, quivering. I loved her at that moment as much as I ever had, but I was also sickened by the sight of her. She listened to my speech and then, with a voice strained and on the verge of collapse, said, "I'm so sorry, Bob. I love you more than my own life. I'm so very sorry." I looked at her, feeling numb after having done what I planned. All I could say was, "So am I." As my control threatened to slip, I removed my wedding ring and dropped it on the floor in front of her. I kept my promises and quickly walked away before I lost my composure, going outside to find John. He was standing in the same spot, watching the sheriff and Junior talking together. They turned, waved, and then left as they drove away. John turned to me and asked, "Well, was that what you wanted?" I looked at him and replied, "Yes, it was, and I didn't enjoy any of it." He wasn't surprised and placed a large hand on my shoulder before walking away. I watched him get into his Camaro and drive off. Less than a month later, Tom and Christine put their house up for sale. The day before the movers arrived, Tom stopped to speak with me. I went outside and stood with him, watching Christine direct the movers. He hesitated, then said, "I know it was you who sent me the envelope. Was there more?" He wasn't looking directly at me, but I knew he was waiting for my response. Remembering John's advice, I glanced at Christine, who looked over and met my gaze. Unable to maintain eye contact, she looked away. I decided to tell Tom there was more, but I won't give it to you. You need to decide what you want to do. As someone once told me, if this is all you know, there is a chance for your marriage to survive." Tom nodded once, then turned and walked away. I never saw or spoke to either of them again. Sam Fontaine was indicted and found guilty of grand theft. Because he refused to admit his guilt, the court sentenced him to 10 years. He began serving his sentence a month ago and continues to claim he had no idea where the stolen items came from. 6 months later, I received the final divorce papers. It was on a Thursday, the same night Maxine and Christine went out for their girls' night out. It seemed like such a small thing to signify the end of so much, just a set of papers stating that the marriage was dissolved, an equitable distribution of assets agreed upon, and that custody of the minor children was to be shared. Just like that, one part of my life was over. I sat in my office and reflected on the end of the last 15 years of my life. Maxine had a small apartment across town and had been seeing the kids every weekend until we finally agreed on shared custody. With the divorce final, I had them during the summer months, and Maxine had them during the school year. To make things easier for the kids, I took over Maxine's apartment, and she moved back into the house with the children. Tiffany was now in 3rd grade, and Leaf was just starting preschool. Mom stayed with me during the summer to help care for them and also volunteered to assist Max whenever needed, though I was unsure who else Max had to support her. Maxine and I talk occasionally, trying hard not to discuss the past. She still tries to explain what happened, but I get angry when she does, so she eventually stopped. She attempted to talk to me before the divorce was finalized, but I refused. I knew I would break down if I allowed it, and it was harder on me than she realized to let her go. Marriage is based on trust and mutual commitment, and Maxine had broken those vows and destroyed our marriage. I still loved her, of course, nothing would change that. Unconditional love seemed to be deeply ingrained in me. Despite everything, I couldn't stop loving her, so I had no choice but to avoid her as much as possible. I look back on our years together and remember the good times, which is easy when I'm with my kids. They represent all that is good and pure. I try not to dwell on the bad. I also remember the words of a wise man, John Spalding, who told me that choosing my path meant I would have no chance to save my marriage. I still wonder why I chose to go this route. What if I had confronted her? What if I had forced her to choose? Would she have chosen me in our marriage? Even if she had, what would have stopped her from repeating the same behavior in the future? I know I would always wonder what she was doing whenever things seemed off. But still, I wonder. Every night, as I come home to be alone, the question I keep asking myself is simple. Now that I got exactly what I wanted, why am I not content? Consequences can be difficult for both sides. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.